Reddit says, r/AskReddit. What was the hardest piece of news you've had to tell someone? I had to tell my mom that the bike that I reported stolen to the police was under the fucking porch. I like how almost all these have to do with dying relatives and you all like my duck and bike brothers. After my wife woke up from a medically induced coma I had to tell her our son died. The look of soul shattering pain still bothers me. I just can't. That must have been the lowest moment imaginable. I hope you find some joy and happiness now and in the future. Tell my dad, who was in the hospital 2 weeks away from his own death, that his father had died. Dad hadn't yet accepted that he himself was dying, though my sister and I could see it. Grandpa had been in hospice for 2 months, so we all knew that his end was near. In the week between Grandpa's death and his funeral, Dad began to accept that he didn't have much time left. Dad made it to Grandpa's funeral, albeit via ambulance/wheelchair, and saw his extended family for the last time. That was a surreal experience for me, watching him say goodbye. That must have been heartbreaking for you. It was. I had buried my mom's mom, and Dad's mom at the rate of one funeral every 13 to 14 months for the years directly preceding Dad's death, a total of 5 funerals in less than 5 years, and been responsible for Dad's end-of-life medical care and decision making, so I was all but numb by that time. Still hurt to watch the realization hit him, and to watch the realization hit everyone else, that my dad wasn't going to last much longer when they saw him at the funeral. Again, surreal. After my parents split up, my dad moved us in with his mother. She was one of those grandmas who woke up every morning to get my siblings and I up for school, because my dad left for work at 4 AM and worked 12-hour days usually. One day she didn't wake us up. Just as was coming out of my room, I saw my younger, 4 years, I was 17, coming out of her room. We just kind of looked at each other and had a no shit moment. I went in to check on grandma. She was cold, so I called 911 and then had to call Dad. That was hard, and because he worked about 30 minutes away, this was the 90s, so cell phones weren't that common yet. I had to call all the aunts and uncles too, and then dig out grandma's DNR from where Dad told me it was and hand it to the EMTs that showed up. So it was definitely the 7 worst calls of my life so far. Edit. Thank you all for the messages of sympathy/condolence, I really appreciate it. For all other replies/comments I'm trying to reply to them as I can. I'm at work right now. When I was probably 12 to 13, I was driving with my dad in town and we decided to stop in on my 70y/0 grandmother who lived alone at about 3 in the afternoon on a Sunday, just to check up on her. We ring the doorbell several times. Nothing. We knock on the door. We knock harder. Nothing. So Dad uses his spare key to let us in. We get inside, and it is all dark and quiet. We give this look to each other that says, well, fuck, we are about to find grandma dead somewhere in here. We go room by room, and finally we get to her bedroom. You can hear her noise machine and humidifier running behind the door. We slowly open up her bedroom door. She jumps up out of bed and yells, "Oh my god, you scared me. I was just really tired today, so I thought I'd go to bed a little bit early." One morning my dad and I went to surprise my 93-year-old great-grandmother at her home, where she lives alone. We ring the doorbell, no response. Knock on the side door, no response. Knock on the front door, no response. Check through the front window, and we see her slumped over on her couch. We tried calling her phone, yelling for her, nothing gets her attention. We are certain she's dead, and we can't get to her. Then her neighbor comes out and says that the two of them had just gone for a walk and she must be napping. So she unlocks the door and grandma wakes up. She had taken her hearing aid out and passed out on the couch. That was quite the relief. You had us in the first half, not gonna lie. I had to tell my spouse and children that my 26-year-old took his own life. I'm so sorry. What a horrible loss. Please be kind to yourself. It always amazes me how supportive Reddit can be sometimes. When the chips are down and the mood is somber, you can count on the majority of internet users to put on their decent faces for just a few minutes. They'll tell offensive jokes, make impossibly grotesque memes and act all tough, but something like this comes along. They show their humanity and it makes you believe in them again. telling someone's family that we are giving up on searching for their loved ones who are lost at sea. I've been a person that received that news, and I could only imagine how hard it must have been for the Coast Guard to decide that. They made an incredible effort in stormy weather. We didn't find out until later that my friends had been shot and thrown overboard. There was no chance for survival and nothing other than their boat was ever recovered. I always wanted to send a thank you letter to the Coast Guard, but 12 years later I still can't get past the first 2 lines. I joined search and rescue as a way to try and pay that back, but it proved to be more than I wanted to handle emotionally. So, thank you for trying so hard to find our loved ones. We didn't find out until later that my friends had been shot and thrown overboard. If you don't mind me asking, what's the story on that? Was it pirates/smugglers or something? My friend's husband owned a charter fishing company. The booker accepted 2 men without IDs believing a story that their girlfriends had their ads on an island the men were booking for. In reality, one was fleeing charges in another state and their intent was to steal the boat. After my friends were reported missing, the Coast Guard located the 2 passengers on the lifeboat associated with my friend's boat. They had money, weapons and a BS story about pirates killing everyone but them. There was enough evidence to convict the men, but one confessed to avoid the death penalty. There are crime shows that feature it, but so far none of the books or shows have been able to just tell the story without over dramatizing it, making it feel like they tarnish the memory. The show Dark Waters will do an episode this fall. They seemed respectful when I spoke to them. Let's hope they are. I won't be in the show because I declined to be named or on camera. Not really something I want to bear in such a way. I did some searching, and the Joe Cool story seems to match yours to a T. I'm really sorry for your loss, man. Yeah, that's them. There was a valiant effort to recover them though, and I'm so thankful to those who did their best to do so. The dedication of Coast Guard and search and rescue teams across the country will never cease to amaze me. When I was 22 my parents asked me to come home and watch my grandma, who had dementia and needed a carriage driver, while they went to visit my brother who was living out of the country. 2 days in, my grandma died in her sleep. Not only did I have to deal with being the person who found my grandma dead by myself, but I then had to call all of my various family members, parents, aunts, brothers, to let them know what happened. Sorry it came down to you to bear the bad news. I hope you enjoyed each other's company in her final days. She definitely had no idea who I was, but I think she knew she was with someone who loved her, and honestly, that's the best I could hope for in that situation. When I told my dad that he was in the early stage of dying and was moving to hospice care, he told me, oh good, because he was so tired of being sick with Parkinson's. He died 2 weeks later. Well, by reading all these comments about hospice care I realized that my grandma also just got moved to hospice care. She was in the hospital because she fell down the stairs, but now she moved to a place where she can recover in peace instead of a busy hospital like my dad told me. My grandpa is also living there now because he always wants to be with her, and that wasn't possible in the hospital. IDK what to think. IDK your situation, but there are also things like rehab centers that are designed to do just that, help patients recover in peace without being in a hospital. It's not just hospital or hospice. My daughter died from suicide at 20 years old. My mom was in her last hours in hospice. I had to tell her. It was the worst weekend in my life. 10 years later, I still struggle with it. I miss them both every day. Edit. She told me she would look for her. Edit. I don't know much at all about this formatting thing. To answer as to why I told her, this was after my mom had a long battle with cancer. We made a pact early on, along with my sister, of a strict policy of honesty from then on. I was bound to tell her. I actually think the news helped her along to the other side. I have been beside loved ones at their deaths near in the past. It is not easy for them to let go. She died within the hour. This week marks 10 years. I'm now finally not relying on the bottle to cope. My wife, not my daughter's mother, but very close to my daughter just the same, has been a lifesaver and huge support despite my PTSD rage. Some days are great, others, I just want to give up. Your comments and gilding have uplifted me today. For that, I cannot thank you enough, dear editors. That cardinal living in my backyard for the last 8 years makes me smile every day. She told me she would look for her. That is by far the sweetest thing. I'm so sad for you. Yep, that made me tear up. That edit though. Telling my mom over the phone, while she's in the hospital, that I just found my dad in bed, passed away. She was in so much denial that he had died. She tried to convince me that maybe he's just doped up on sleeping pills. I wished it were true, but I had already knew he was gone when I tried to move him. Staffers aboard. Paramedics came in and confirmed he died. Mom was on the phone still and heard everything. I never knew heartbreak could have a sound until I heard my mom break down on the phone. I tried to keep my composure, but I ended up having to mute the phone call and let some tears out myself. This was almost 2 years ago. That sound is something that you hear and feel at the same time. It's something that you never want to experience again. I'm so sorry for your loss. A regular of mine almost fell to his death washing windows in a 4-story building. He miraculously survived yet broke every bone in his body and cracked his skull. First responders were firefighters right near Houston Street and Broadway in New York City. If they hadn't responded, he would have died right there. Fast forward 4 weeks later, September 15th, 2001. He is out of his coma and finally able to be taken home by his sister and out of hospice. Barely able to speak, he manages to whispers that he wants her pass him by the fire station 2 blocks down so he could thank his rescuers. His sister had to then explain the black smoke still lingering in the air, the entirety of the 9/11 attacks, and that every single first responder that helped him perished. Sometimes that worn out older man sitting at the bar day drinking red wine has a really good story to tell. Broke my heart. This is one of those stories where you don't have anything to add and just kinda sit like darn. This has probably been the most heart-wrenching one to read. Had to call my girlfriend parents at 1 AM to tell them there was a bad accident, that their daughter was en route to her, and I thought she would be okay. She died on arrival. Worst day of my life. Dude, I can't imagine the pain you must have gone through. I hope you are kind to yourself. The kicker was slashes I was in that seat she was in moments before. Overcome by the need to get out and drive my own vehicle, we were just loading into car to leave. I got out and offered her to come with me in my car. She chose to stay and slid over into my seat. The seat that hit the tree would have been me. Her brother was my best friend for 15 years before. What an unfortunate coincidence. No one knew what was coming. Be kind to yourself and cherish the memories you made with her leading up to the accident, friend. I headed up a few departments at my last job, and as dep head, I had to be the one to fire people in those departments. It always sucks, even if they are the worst and totally deserve it. Never feels good to take away someone's security. I worked at a company that would make you jump through hoops to fire anyone. So if after a couple of months of me trying to work with somebody to get them on the right path didn't help, they would get fired. The job wasn't especially hard, so I always felt better with the thought that if the job was really important to them, they might have pushed a little harder to keep it. Yep, letting someone go tomorrow sucks. My brother, who was active military at the time, had to be granted emergency leave for my mother who was on her deathbed after a short but destructive battle with cancer. They took more than 24 hours to sign one name on that document to release him, even knowing the circumstances. When he became noticeably upset that they were taking their time with it, they pulled him aside and threatened to make him undergo a psych evaluation for being, understandably, angry. She died while he was on his flight home. I had to tell him over the phone that he missed the passing of our mom and he wouldn't ever be able to say goodbye. That was rough. Oh wow, duck them so hard for dragging their feet. Being in the military, I can attest to the lack of urgency a lot of administrative staff has. All it is to them is more paperwork, and the higher ranks never get around to it promptly because it's just another leave form. It drives me insane, especially in circumstances like this, when these people are supposed to be your brothers and sisters, but won't sign a piece of paper in an expedited manner. I had to tell my best friend in high school that I was the one who reported her dad for molesting her. She had spoken only to me in confidence and our pastor. They pulled her out of class after it was reported and allowed her a friend for comfort. She chose me, and as she sat sobbing, speaking of how horribly she hated our pastor, how she would never forgive him, I looked her in the eyes and told her it was me. I was 16. Edit. I've been in the woods with my dog all day and coming home to this outpouring of support from all of you. I'm sitting here crying my eyes out. At the time I truly did not think I was doing anything special. A friend was in trouble, and if you can help, you do. The pastor never received punishment for not reporting, and this was the beginning of my discomfort with organized religion. As for my friend, she completely cut off contact and moved out of state as soon as she could. Post-trial, she surprised me by visiting on a trip home a few years later. I will always remember how she looked when she said, "I'm so sorry we can never be friends again. I look at you and see everything. But you absolutely saved my life. I'm okay with that now." At the time it tore my heart up. That was incredibly brave of you to report in the first place and then admit it. Did she forgive you? Did she forgive you? Not op, but it can take a while. I called the police on a friend. I called him, and he said he was sitting on his bed with his father's handgun contemplating using it. He despised me for a year or so. He was gay, his family was homophobic, and so he knew what would happen when they found out, and I was the one that threw him out of the closet. It hurt. I lost a best friend in 5 minutes. Then he worked with his therapists, and we had a very emotional reunion as he cried and thanked me over and over for making that call. Also, he was half wrong about his family. When faced with reality versus an abstract, they discovered that it didn't matter. He was their son, they loved him, and nothing would change that. His extended family were still asses, unfortunately. I called 911 on an ex who was in the process of suicide. I had just called him out of the blue, even though we were broken up. He sounded progressively drunker on the phone, even though he didn't really drink. When I pressed him about why he sounded like that, he told me he had taken all of his olanzapine. I hung up and called 911. The next day, I went to his best friend's house and we called all the hospitals to track him down and check on him. He was confused as to how we knew he was in the hospital, and when he found out I called the ambulance, boy did he tear a strip off me. He was pissed that I interrupted his plan. Years later he thanked me, trying to explain to my 4-year-old niece why my longtime girlfriend wasn't with me anymore. She just didn't understand and kept asking questions like, "I thought Auntie Blank loved you. Why did she leave?" The breakup was recent and that conversation hurt, man. When me and my last ex broke up, I had heard that her little brother was pretty upset because I was the closest thing he had to an older brother. I felt pretty shitty for a little bit after that. Edit. Since so many people keep commenting about it, the little bro lives on the other side of the country now, and his mother wasn't exactly fond of me. I was a pretty shitty boyfriend to her daughter, so I can't exactly keep in contact with him. My ex-wife and I got married really young. It lasted 2 years. A few weeks after we split, I came back to the house to pick up my stuff and her parents and nephews were there. The parents sort of acknowledged me, but the nephews were excited to see me, and that felt shitty. Her lab was the worst part though. When she saw me, she acted like I had scolded her. She sat next to me with her head down, ears back, teeth out. I almost felt like she understood the situation better than anyone else. I expected her to jump on me because we were always the tightest, but I've never seen her so submissive. I actually stopped by the house after work for a few weeks to hand feed her because they couldn't get her to eat. Telling my dad that my mom was cheating on him. I had evidence and everything. Pictures, witnesses, and even names and references. The guy had a family with kids and everything, and they practically gave me a lot of info. After a year my dad is low-key mad at me for telling him, and my mom doesn't trust me anymore, since dad stated where he got the info, even when I told him not to tell mom where he got the info from. So now I'm the bad guy and a black sheep of the family. They got back together now, and they bully me to get their way. My mom still cheats, but I'm not telling dad, because it'll be my fault. Right now I'm debating to tell dad, because ever since my mom started cheating, my allowance kept going down and down, because she goes drinking often, and dad doesn't know, since he's abroad working. What should I do? I'm a third-year college student and wanna move out of this mess with my younger brother and sister. Edit. For people asking about the allowance thing, I don't make much, so I only can pay 60 to 80% of my tuition. The allowance helps so that I can put 100% of my earnings to school, so I won't have debt. Edit 2. My dad is a good father. He is a good person. My mom just bends his will. Edit 3. For everyone that is telling to anonymously leave a tip for my dad. They will pin it on me. Even if someone else spills the beans, they'll think it's me. Edit 4. I'm very thankful to have all this advice. This is like a lifeline. I was very depressed and problematic. Now I have some relief to it all, knowing that I'm not alone. Thank God for Reddit. Edit 5. I will update this when I tell my dad or move out or something like that. I didn't know that a lot would be interested. Thank you for your motivation and support, everyone. Edit 6. To the people that say that I should talk to my mom. She yells instantly when proven wrong. She will literally yell at you to get out. My mother has an anger issue. Maybe I do too. She hates her younger brother. She dislikes her other younger brother. She just made peace to her younger sister because her sister did the same thing she did minus the abroad part. Edit 7. I can't talk back to my parents because they think it's disrespectful and that they are always right. I do sometimes because it just gets ridiculous sometimes. I got to tell somebody about the 9/11 attacks. He had just been laid off the previous week, so he slept in. So I called him and said, dude, we are under attack. Turn on the TV. He asked what channel. I said doesn't matter. That was a strange day all around. What channel? Doesn't matter. For those too young to remember, this is very historically accurate. Stuff was crazy. Even the non-news channels were reporting it. Freaking Comedy Central was reporting it. Now at the age of 30, I have younger friends who were too young to remember 9/11, and it's weird and makes me feel old having to explain it to them. Does anyone else remember all the misinformation going about on the first day? I remember people saying that it was a cruise missile. I worked as a pediatric psychology fellow while in graduate school, PhD clinical psychology. This invoked providing psychological services for all children in the hospital. One of my very first weeks I was shadowing a more experienced fellow, and we encountered a family whose child, 7-year-old, was hospitalized after she was in a car accident with her father. Her father died in the accident and no one in her family was comfortable directly explaining this to the child. They had used a lot of religious euphemisms about death. He's watching over you in heaven. He's with you in spirit. But this language is not concrete enough for a young child who doesn't really understand death. Sitting with this child, body brace, lacerations all over, very flat effect, and explaining to her what death was, that her father had died, and having to ask questions to make sure she understood, was one of the most traumatizing experiences of my graduate training. I can still vividly imagine her face while we were telling her, and the tears silently rolling down her face. Thank you for your compassion. I'm sure that was horrifically challenging, but the fact that you remember her shows how much it affected you, and I'm sure she affected your personal and professional development. You are good people for taking on that pain to help her and her family. Simon says, like and subscribe for more videos. See you in the next one.